Alrighty, this is week 7. Our topic for this week is graphic novels. And this tends to be like either a really like eye-opening week for students or kind of a really challenging week because of how graphic novels are designed. So for this week, the additional reading, the textbook reading, is incredibly important because it's going to give you most of the information that you are going to need to be able to work on the discussion board post. So please make sure you pay very careful attention as you are reading that. Your graphic novels to choose from this week are going to be longer in length, but they tend to be much faster to read through. So if you see like 320 pages and panic, please try not to, because it is a blend of images and text. Like I said, they do tend to be pretty quick to get through. The reason why I said that the textbook reading is really, really important is because a lot of the questions for this lecture for this week and for the discussion board posts, you need to have some of that information or a lot of that information in your brain, or typed up as notes to kind of help guide you. If you don't, it's going to be really obvious that you didn't look at the reading and you're kind of just trying to spitball and give me information. So we're going to do some background knowledge checking. This is thinking. If you are somebody that really likes notes, you can take notes. If you're like, I'll just take a few things, that's fine. But these are some of these questions that are from the reading to kind of really help you figure out what is it that you're supposed to be getting. So towards the beginning of the reading, we get some reasons for why like adults and like parents were against graphic novels and were against like younger children or like adolescents reading graphic novels. It is really important to be able to identify what some of those reasons were that they gave. They're not necessarily the most satisfying of answers and reasons because we don't get a lot of like explanation beyond this is one of the reasons that they had issues. But it is something to kind of pause and to consider and think about, like, why was it such a big concern for them? And also bear in mind that our textbook is not really that old. So this is somewhat like current concerns. And kind of wrestle with yourself, like whether it seems like they have any sort of like basis for being an actual concern. The second and third thing that the reading does is it gives us a definition of what comics are and a definition of what graphic novels are. There is a very slight difference between the two of them. Please make sure you know what the difference is. Our topic, our genre this week is graphic novels, not comics. We do not touch comics. Longer length things are going to be graphic novels, but that's not the difference between the definition. Just make sure that you can tell what the subtle difference is between the two of them. The next question, what content do comics tend to have? The textbook reading is going to end up saying comics more than graphic novels. We are going to think of them as graphic novels, not comics. And I know that's going to be a little confusing. I have not found an updated reading that uses graphic novels as the term, but for the purposes of our class, it is graphic novels. So this question is asking, like, what stories do graphic novels tend to have? And I have comics to try to help you if you're looking at the reading. You're like, it only mentions graphic novels like twice. Based off of the reading, what do these graphic novel stories tend to focus on? Is it issues of like identity? Is it issues of power struggles? Is it political memes? Is it like coming of age? What type of stories do we tend to see? The next one is, what do the readers think the graphic novels can help teach young readers? If you are in an education setting, or if you feel like you have other things to add for this answer to kind of think about, by all means, go for it. This one is still like heavily argued in the literature world and education world of like what do graphic novels help young readers with, if they help with anything. And so it's really, really arguable whether you can be pro or anti-graphic novels based off the reading. What are they supposed to be able to teach young readers? And then the last one is really important for this week. It's asking what should be looked at. So like what should be analyzed, what should we be paying attention to when we are trying to critically analyze graphic novels. There is a little like hint there for you that you to list and give like really brief explanations of the terms. It's back to back on the terms. Just make sure that you're aware of them. And if you get to the prompt for the discussion board posts this week and you're like, I don't recognize them, go back to the reading. Do not Google. Look at the reading, please. But these are just to kind of give us our foundation so that everybody's kind of accessing the different graphic novel options on the same ground. To give you some historical perspective on graphic novels, there are some comics in here because that's kind of the US's history with graphic novels. But to give you a little bit more like outside information, graphic novels only came about because comic books popped up in the 1930s in the US. I'm not saying that graphic novels wouldn't have become a thing, but like graphic novels came from comics. So there are a lot of foundations that graphic novels sometimes use that are found in comics. So they're kind of unfortunately linked together. It wasn't until like the 1950s that we went from having like the little teeny tiny comic strips in like the Sunday newspaper to full length comic books. So again, it's a 20-year period of like development. One of the first ones that was published was The Adventures of Tintin. And if you just look at this and you look at like the imagery, the colors, and that it's in the land of the Soviets, we should have a pretty good idea of what The Adventures of Tintin in the land of Soviets is about. And given the time frame, we're talking about like the huge fear of like communism that popped up in the US. So comics doing pretty good for the first 20 years. And then 1954, the Comics Code Authority was created. And this was created not by people that were genuinely like interested in comics and like loved the genre that was developing. It was a mix between people that enjoyed them and people that were afraid of them. So the CCA really was designed to kind of regulate and restrict and define and like censor comics instead of having our government be in charge of that. So they went from saying that there were things like screen nicely warning kind of lewd-ish illusion in the upper, like the very top one, we have a comic of a girl who is potentially dressing or undressing, mentioning that like the other character in the panel named Ron might be mad at them, but they know how to cheer them up and to sit down. So like there's a lot of like alluding going on to what is potentially going to be happening in coming panels. And panels like this, it's a singular like panel, right? So it's not a huge, we're not seeing a bunch of different images. But the CCA started to regulate stuff like this because they were like, if we have a child who picks up a Sunday paper and sees this, this isn't the best thing. Which there is valid reasons and arguments for that. So it was kind of like a double-edged sword. Like it was a good thing because it was there were people that were involved in the comics community, but it was also a bad thing because there was like an overregulation of what was considered acceptable and not acceptable to publish. The last example that we see on here, violence trigger warning. We have a soldier with a gun pointed at a person's face. And unfortunately, the depiction of the man who has the gun at his face is supposed to be kind of like a caricature of the Ningpo area. So again, like this is not great representation. The CCA did kind of come in and deal with some of this to make it a little less like problematic, but they also made some things significantly worse. So it's like a really muddy, messy thing. After CCA pops in, we go from the next kind of thing. It's not until 1964 that graphic novel as a term is actually brought up at all. And it's brought up by a owner for a shop named Richard Kyle. So it wasn't even somebody that was like creating comics, it was somebody that like sold them. It didn't become popular to use until 1978 when Will Eisner used it to like market to try to like get people interested in purchasing his graphic novel, A Contract with God, and other tenement stories. Will Eisner's A Contract with God is really controversial. There is a lot of very, 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 very heavy religious undertones, which again, it's not saying that it's a bad thing, but because it was the first to use the term graphic novel, it kind of tainted and really shaped what a lot of people thought graphic novels could be, and like what the content should be. So big thing, graphic novel, nothing is nice, everything is messy, everybody is angry for one reason or another. So to go with that lovely feeling of anger and aggression, historically in the US, comic books have been attacked. Graphic novels as well have been attacked as being seen as not real literature, like they're not literary enough. There's not enough like themes. There's not enough literal poetic language to support calling it real literature, real reading. And it sometimes goes to the point of people believing that comics and graphic novels are actually harmful to people's developing reading abilities. So we had a very, very huge wave of people who were like, not only is the content not great, but it can straight up like damage your brain and like your ability to read, which hopefully should sound a little bizarre. Hopefully. If it doesn't, hopefully this week kind of helps you realize that like there is a lot that you have to be able to do to read a graphic novel and like do it successfully and like well. So unfortunately, because of this in, we're talking the 1978, 1980s, it's not that long ago. A lot of these bad understandings and misunderstandings about graphic novels are still widely believed by a lot of parents, widely believed by a lot of teachers, and widely believed a lot about or by a lot of librarians. So, and just to give you some context, when I was in elementary and middle school, the only options that I had for a graphic novel were Captain Underpants. High school, there was nothing. Versus my first year teaching in 7th grade, going and looking at the library, there was so many other options. There was like the Smile series, we had Captain Underpants. There was, oh my goodness, the dog one, the dog spinoff, kind of like similar thing to Captain Underpants. The name is escaping my brain right now. There were like retellings of fairy tales that were in graphic. Is a huge thing. So manga is not graphic novels and it's not really comics. It's its own kind of thing, but those are huge. The last couple of years that I was in like teaching 7th grade, most of my students were picking up manga. And our librarian and library didn't have enough to be able to have students reading and being able to pick manga that they were wanting to read because it didn't have the volume. So having adults in positions deciding who gets to like have access to things, what they purchase, can be really like damaging and can cause and has caused a lot of students to lose the love of reading because they kind of get taught that like, oh, what it is that you enjoy reading isn't reading. And a lot of you have mentioned that in your reader autobiography videos, that like you don't consider yourself a reader, but you guys read so much. It's just not you sitting down with a traditional book and reading, but you do read and you are a reader. It's just not the way you were taught to believe what readers should be doing and reading. 2015. Okay, so with less than 10 years ago, I had to double check the math. We had El Defo. And El Defo was an honor book for the Newbery Medal. And then we had this one summer that was an honor book for the Caldecott Medal, which we talked about last week and a few weeks ago. This was the first time, so 2015, the first time any sort of graphic novels were recognized by any sort of like well-known book awards for children's. El Defo has been so popular that there's now like a TV series being developed, and the author's been really like engaged and part of that process to kind of help dictate, like, no, this is what I wanted this book to be able to do. So it wasn't until this 2015 that the idea that graphic novels could be seen as real literature kind of had some sort of support. And it's only because, like, these two graphic novels got honors. Like, they didn't even win the award, y'all. They just were recognized. It's not until 3 years ago, 2020, Jerry Craft's New Kid won the Newbery Medal, that graphic novels kind of really started to see a change in how they were perceived. And we started to see a huge, which is in a 3-year time span, a huge uptick in access to graphic novels and having them in classrooms. So we have a very, very long history of comics graphic novels, and it's not until the last probably 5 years that we've seen such a massive increase in what's being published, what's being purchased, and what's being put in class. 5 years might sound like a lot, but for literature, that is a huge turnaround time. That is a huge, really important thing to be paying attention to. So kind of some more important things. Not all graphic novels are written and intended for children. They sometimes might look like it, but not all graphic novels are for kids. Cough, cough, case in point, Watchmen. Very mature content. There is heavy trigger warning for assault and incredible violence. So you have to be careful. There are so graphic novels are one of the most popular genres for children, and there are fortunately a ton of graphic novels that are made for kids, but we have to just be kind of careful, be aware, right? Don't just pick up something based on the cover, which I know is a fun thing for a lot of us, but we have to kind of be careful with graphic novels. Where we're at historical perspective wise is that graphic novels are being and have been argued as beneficial for children to read, and that they do actually have literary merit. They are able to explore really tough themes that a lot of other genres, a lot of other formats can't really do in a way that makes the theme accessible to who is reading it. Because if you're just reading a bunch of words and it's a really heavy topic, you're not getting, literally, your eyes are not getting a break to be able to process what it is that you are reading. With a graphic novel, there's little, literal spaces, and sometimes the space is different on each page that you're looking at. It's to give your brain and your eyes a chance to pause, even if you don't actually pause, to kind of process what it is that you were reading and seeing. The visual aspect also is incredibly helpful for tougher themes because there's less chance of being misinterpreted when you can literally see what it is that you're supposed to be imagining. Yes, it takes away some of the creative license of I imagine this person looking this way, but there's so much more that you can do with having that image. You can more specifically imagine someone doing something, or you can literally see them doing. So there's plus and minuses for the creative imaginative part. There's also a huge trend of like rewriting traditional novels in graphic novels. And my favorite thing that's come out of this is there's been some of the classics that you guys mentioned in your like um, anything Great Gatsby-esque, John Steinbeck-esque, Shakespeare, Chaucer, which if you don't know, Chaucer is like the really old English, like you have to kind of literally know a secondary English language to understand and speak it correctly. They are being taken, these really dense, like hard to understand texts are being taken and reworked into graphic novels. And it just makes it so much easier to understand what's going on. There's a lot of playability that you could have as somebody who is maybe trying to read them and be like, I know I was supposed to read this. I didn't understand it. You can look at both, right? You can look at your classic, the prose version. You can look at the graphic novel version and kind of be able to merge like what is supposed to be going on versus what you understand is going on. There's been a lot of fairy tales and like Disney princess kind of esque things that have been turned into graphic novels. There's just so much. Like Percy Jackson is being turned into graphic novels. Um, there are a lot of like indigenous and Asian and Pacific Islander authors who are using graphic novel format. So we're seeing not just specific stories to specific cultures, but we're seeing different art styles pop up for graphic novels, which is also like incredibly fascinating. But this historical perspective is kind of where we're at now. That like there's more access, there's a lot more options, they should be recognized and are sort of being recognized as being real literature. Um, but we're not everything is like super fantastic, but we are definitely getting there. So as you are looking at your novel, as you are reading, I want you to kind of like check with yourself, especially if it's your first time reading a graphic novel. I want you to kind of sit with like, how was the reading experience for you? Was it difficult? How much did you have to adjust the way that you approached reading the novel? Did you have to kind of like look up a guide online of like how are you supposed to read graphic novels? Did you find some of the extra space on the page distracting? Did you find the illustrations helpful, distracting? What about like what it was you were actually reading? Just kind of really sit with, did it take you longer? Did it seem like it was more stressful? Did it seem like it was super easy? You were like, this is the fastest and easiest. I understood what was going on. Like really, I'm not expecting you to be like, oh, like don't lie to me. Don't be like, yeah, it was the most amazing experience ever. Like, be serious with yourself. Think about yourself as a reader, how you feel about yourself. How was it having to read through? Um, if you did have to change your perspective on how you like read, how you approach reading, or if you had to change it just a little bit, did this affect kind of how you think about graphic novels? And it's okay for like, no, but again, I just want us to kind of get thinking about it. Um, I want you to think if your book did win an award, why? Does it seem like it was justified? What stood out to you as why it might have won the award? Um, Question number 4 and 5 are the most important on this slide. I want you to think about the elements of comic book design that stood out to you. So this is specifically from the reading for this week. What did you notice about how the comic book, how your graphic novel was literally designed, about the pages? And then how do the visual elements that were used add to the story? It's add, it could be a negative, it could be a positive, but I want you to explain to me like the use of like specific facial expressions either like helped me understand what was going on in the situation, if it was contrasting with what the character was saying versus what we're supposed to understand feeling. I want you to dig into these last two because they're part of your prompt for this week. And again, they're kind of directly from the reading on graphic novels. And then the last kind of thing that I want you to do is kind of more like self-reflective. I want you to see if there's a character in the book that you felt like you identified with the most and like why. This might be hard if reading through the graphic novel was a little bit of a struggle for you. But I want you to go back to just basics. Was there a character that you latched onto? You could identify with them because their experience was so different from yours, but there's still something that kind of connected you to them. That's fine, but I want you to see if you can find somebody. And then I want you to get a little bit more broad, to think about how your experiences with your life, how you were grown up and developed, um, how were your experiences similar and like not similar with the main characters for your novel. This is just to kind of help you get to think about, okay, yes, we're tackling a very different type of format for a genre for children's and young adult literature, but are there still like the same basics for prose novels there? Are you still able to identify characters, connect with them, understand like similarities and differences in yourself? So this is our last kind of like reflective thingy, to really get you thinking about like how do graphic novels fit, or not fit with your understanding of what literature can be.